connected, but we're like
No.
100 feet.
Clearly, in your role as a planning commissioner, just because you're an adjacent neighbor doesn't mean you have a conflict. Conflicts of interest involve financial gain personally to you or a
Okay.
close family member.
Staff
Yep.
is happy with that?
Yeah. No, that's fine.
Disclosure of outside communications regarding commission business. Do we have any?
Yeah, I've had a couple people hit me up about the electronic sign board proposal.
And your response was?
I wasn't at the last meeting, so I really don't know what's going on. I hadn't gotten my packet yet. I said I know it's on the agenda, but that's all I know.
We shouldn't have any problems with that, should we?
No, that's fine to disclose it though.
Okay. Number 4, call to the public. Members of the public who wish to address the planning commission regarding items not on the agenda may do so at this time. Any presentation is for information purposes only. No action will be taken, and there is a 4-minute time limit. Do we have anyone that would like to address the planning commission? Seeing none at this time. There is no public hearing. Old business, discuss the text amendment allowing the digital highway monument sign. And I'd like staff to report
Sure.
on that.
Yeah, Commissioner, before I do that, I did want to remind you, we're streaming the meetings now. I turned all your mics on just now. I think they were all off at the very first of the meeting. So we can hear just fine in the room, but just keep in mind, for the purposes of the video stream, if your mic isn't on, we're going to have trouble hearing you. So you can leave them on, you can turn them off, whatever, but just kind of be mindful of that. So by way of introduction on the text amendment, and Ian, you weren't here last time, but we kind of gave a little history behind some of these discussions that we've had on the highway billboard, highway monument signs in the past, specifically the electronic message board, the interchangeable video boards has come up on one previous occasion, and now it's come up again. It's been several years, but the question is a little bit different than the previous discussion we had. Previously, it was about a pole-mounted video board sign. Now the thought is that the structure of these signs would be more of a monument type structure. So at the meeting in September, we had quite a lengthy discussion about a proposed text amendment that would allow those by special use permit along the K-10 highway only. So this would just be opening the door to consider a specific individual case-by-case application in the format of a special use permit, which requires a public hearing and planning commission consideration on the individual aspects of a particular sign proposal, and then it would go forward to the city council for a final approval by ordinance. Then a special use permit, you can put whatever conditions you think are appropriate on those, most significantly things like architectural interest and visual appeal and general size and general location, but also a time limit. The special use permit could expire at the end of a 10 or 20-year period, and although we can't control the messaging of an electronic message board. It's a First Amendment thing. We've talked about this ad nauseum here about sign regulations. We can't tell somebody what they can put up on that message board, but it's a little bit of a control over, a completely inappropriate use of the sign. If there's a deadline for this use permit that could go away in the future, a bad actor could be compelled to behave themselves with regard to content, although we don't regulate content. So we talked about that at length at the last meeting. What you have in front of you tonight is a red line version, and the red line have track changes between the version we looked at in September and the current proposed changes. So we talked about several specific aspects of that regulation that we wanted to change. The first of which we really struggled with kind of the definition of the structure type. We had the word monument in the structure type, and that kind of caused, I think, kind of a hang up, because we already defined monument size, a monument structure type, and essentially it's just, you know, like what you would think of. The base is wider than the sign itself, and in our regulations, it's no taller than 6 feet tall. And in this context, with the highway video board, we're talking about heights of 35 feet, you know, to be visible from the highway motorist. So it didn't really jive. The 35 feet doesn't really jive with the monument style sign. So what I've done to account for that is I've just taken the word monument out of the definition of a highway. We're just calling them digital highway advertising sign now. And I've included, and I'm going to skip ahead. I've included this depiction of such sign that we're talking about. The other thing we struggled with was the definition of height, you know, where we define the total height from. The intent was that, you know, to get elevation on a sign like this and to build it 35 feet tall, you might be able to mound earth up rather than providing stone structure or some other structure that might not be as visually appealing. You can mound the earth up from the existing to get some additional height. So in the revised description, we're defining the maximum height to be from the highest point of the pre-existing ground. So the intent on the visual here is to show that maximum height being, you know, if the ground is sloping like this, the maximum height is from the upper end of that to the upper end of the sign. So in terms of the definition of what this looks like, I've also put a disclaimer in here because these things could look like all sorts of different things. This is just intended to show the maximum height and that there needs to be landscaping and there needs to be some architectural appeal to this. Also that I did put in a total sign face maximum. Can't be twice that of the electronic message board area on a square foot basis. So I tried to show that as well. So this just shows that, yes, you can mount it up over the existing grade. It does have to have some landscaping, some visual appeal, and then the electronic message board portion of that can't exceed 672 square feet, which is 14 by 48, which is a pretty common industry standard for these types of signs. So that is that's kind of the definition that we've changed since last time. Other couple of things we changed: we didn't have any setback locations, you know, standards in the previous version, so I've added those. Basically, we're going to meet yard setbacks on the front and side, and if you abut K10 highway, then you can go all the way up to the property line, up to the right-of-way line. Actually, you know, theoretically, the zone that we allow these in might allow for a property that doesn't exactly abut K10 highway to have one of these signs, and in that case, you would have to meet the rear setback as well. And of course, we don't want any of these in the public utility or a public right-of-way. So the setback stuff has kind of been handled. We talked about sign type and design restrictions. Here's where we talk about the design standards. They have to have a base greater in width than the face of this portion of the sign, incorporate earth fill or berms as a means to elevate the message portion of the sign. So that's what I've kind of probably spent too long describing that depiction there. The other thing and Richard provided this language here. We talked about the building material standards. Previous version, I just copied and pasted the exterior material standards for commercial and industrial buildings. Signs are a little different from buildings. And Richard, we talked about it a little bit at the last meeting, but he provided this list of specific materials that could be allowed, and it's pretty lengthy. I'm not going to go through it all, but the last item, number 8 on there, are other materials. We're also saying that if there's anything that is durable, all-weather, you know, then we'll consider it, even if it's not on this list. You know, the materials, this stuff changes almost yearly they come out with something new. So we're not limiting ourselves to just this list. So I think it's it's specific enough, so we're not going to have somebody wanting to just throw trash up there, but also gives us some flexibility in that. Other changes in here, the red lines just really relate to the changing of taking the monument out of the wording for the sign type, and then the total height I've described that a little bit as well. We also, in the language, and I'm looking at page 6 now, sort of the top of page 6 where I'm talking about, this is in section 5 on size and height. We're saying the total height can't exceed 35 feet measured from the highest point. But then we also say that additional height can be considered if it can be proven by a sightline analysis that additional height's needed from just to get the height to be visible from K-10 highway. That's left up the discretion of the planning commission, and then ultimately it would be the city council, because these go forward to them too. This is also where I say the total area can't exceed twice that of the EVMB. Got 2 ofs in there. And then it talks about the line of sight analysis. All applications have to come with that, whether they want additional height or not. We need that line of sight, because it kind of gets back to the discussion we had on Jake's Fireworks buildings and, managing just sight lines. Not that, like we said, it'll be at our discretion. And then we change the ambient light conditions just so that we match KDOT's standards for that. And that was a result of some feedback we had with with Travis Hicks, who's gonna propose one of these, I think, if we continue forward with the amendment. Those are the changes from the last meeting. I think that's all of them. Again, this isn't a public hearing tonight, but our intent, I think, would be to have this discussion. If we have any final tweaks we want to make, let's talk about them, and then call for a public hearing for the November meeting. So that explains it. I'll answer any questions you might have.
I got a question. I know we can't have any input on what the sign says, but do we have any control? What I'm thinking is, some of the comments I've heard is we're worried about the sign advertising for somebody who knows where, like the one that's out there now and did for years.
Yeah.
Do we have any way of controlling that those that advertise are within a specific area close to this town? Is there anything like that we can do?
I don't, off the top of my head, I would say no. I would say that any sort of restriction we put on that would by default be a restriction on the content of the advertising display, and therefore run afoul of the First Amendment. We might be able to get, we may be able to get creative with that, but
Yeah, because that's not really restricting what he's saying. That's just restricting the area that he can advertise within.
Yeah, so
That's,
the
to me, would be a
standard,
different.
the standard we've followed on all of this First Amendment stuff, and this comes from the Supreme Court ruling. Some of the guidance that is contained in there indicates that the test for any regulation you have on signs is such that if you have to know what the sign says to determine whether or not you're going to allow it, then your regulation is unconstitutional. So in other words, if we have to ask, what's your sign gonna say, to know if your sign's okay, I think they might tread into that area.
I don't know. I still kind of think that what we're asking is not regulating the content of the sign.
Yeah.
It's just the area of input.
We may be, maybe that'd be a question for Patrick for sure.
Yeah. Can we
maybe
ask
a
him?
Constitutional.
I figure you're probably right, but I mean, that might be a question that, if we could, would probably make a whole lot of people feel a whole lot better.
And I would say if we pose that restriction on, I know for sure on Mr. Hicks's sign, he wouldn't do this sign. There's no question. The advertising revenue wouldn't be enough for him to fund.
Not our problem.
Right. That's fine, but
I'll also make a comment that if we input something like that on the electronic board, then that would also have to be applied to all advertising to be equal, because there's a whatever Timber Trails Lake or whatever resort place that's down south of town that's advertised on the sign that's been up there. I think Joe Bazone
Oh,
puts
yeah.
it up there.
yeah.
So he's advertising for a place that's outside of
Mm-hmm.
local. So if something's going to be implemented, it would have to be equally implemented on all levels. But I don't think that I would agree that we can't regulate that.
Yeah, it's a shot, that's for sure.
I can certainly ask Patrick to weigh in on that.
Okay. Linda, do you have anything that you'd like to ask? Mike?
Nothing I'd like to ask. No. I have some concerns.
What would those concerns be?
Well, I know last time I mentioned that, and I do agree that we need some type of advertising. We need some way to promote what's going on in town. But somebody made a comment that has just rolled in the back of my mind, and it's, we don't want to look like Silver Dollar City with all these big signs all over the place. And that just keeps haunting me, and I don't want that. And I don't want to have advertisement from Kansas City, Missouri for something that we were trying to get some type of advertisement for our city. So I'm really having second thoughts about the sign ordinance. I'd like to see a big sign saying DeSoto, Kansas, but an entry sign, but I'm not necessarily sure that I want it to be a sign that's different kind of advertisement, and so many of them too. There's 4. I know we've got that 4 is a lot for this area. So that's my concern.
Tim, how do you feel about that?
I don't know. It's mixed. I mean, the signage is going to be almost a mile apart. That's the only thing. But I could see what you're saying about Silver Dollar City. You know, they're, I guess I don't know how close they are,
Well,
sign to sign. But
the only ones that would have them.
but I'd like to see something. But you know, a City of DeSoto sign out there instead of.
Todd, how you feel about this?
From the standpoint of what we're trying to approve, as far as offering the opportunity for somebody to submit under a special use permit for review by all parties, I don't know that I disagree with what we're discussing. Personally, about the sign, I'm not a huge fan. I'm not totally for it or against it, but this is for the right for somebody to submit for review to possibly put a sign up. We're not saying if it passes,
But we're
Signs
opening
going
the
in.
door for them to do it. So if we're
Understood.
not going to approve it, then this is the time to nix it. Correct?
Well, yes and no. I think if you feel like the majority, and of course, council would be the final approval.
Sure.
But if you feel like there's just no way on earth you would ever want one of these in town, I think the appropriate thing for you to do would be to vote against this amendment. But that's only you. You're not going to be on the planning commission forever,
Right.
and you're not the only member of the planning commission,
Agreed.
and the planning commission is not the only body involved.
Yeah.
So I think it'd be appropriate. I mean, if you feel like this is just too far a step for DeSoto, it probably would be appropriate to vote against recommending the amendment. Now, it's not to say you can't hold a public hearing, and shouldn't. I mean, we are. We've been asked by the council to look into this. So I think procedurally it would be appropriate to proceed with the public hearing. And even if at the public hearing, and of course, we should withhold our judgment until we hear the public hearing.
Sure.
If you vote not to approve this, we'll still take it to the council. The council can either agree or disagree, send it back, or, so we'll have that, we have that back and forth as well. The
If we
council
wanted
could,
to
in
do
the
a
end-
different sign that was smaller, but we still can't restrict what goes on it, could we?
Right, yeah, the content is just, you gotta hands off the content.
What would one of those signs cost approximately?
Rob, have you had any discussions with Travis about the cost of the?
Sure.
Sure. Yeah, could you, because the microphone won't get you unless.
So about $1 million,
Okay.
which is not something the city would be able to afford to do on our own typically. I mean, we could, which is why looking at partnership with somebody to possibly do this was one of the venues. In the text amendment, addressing some of the things, we can't control content.
I know.
But in doing so, in the text amendment, item number 4C, reads, any applicant for a DHA sign must engage in good faith discussions with the city regarding agreements as ways in which the applicant can partner with the city and other local organizations for use of the DHA to benefit the community as a whole and its residents, the details of which will be part of the Planning Commission's review and recommendation on the application of the special use permit. So as far as addressing content, there are standards, and Mike can address this. As far as inappropriate content, we do have some control over that. As far as who's advertising, we don't necessarily, but in discussions with Travis, as far as that goes, one rotation out of every 8 would be dedicated free of cost to the city to be able to promote whatever we want. So 8 seconds out of every 64 would be entirely city. On top of that, he's agreed that in the discussion of this, the Chamber of Commerce would have first right of refusal on advertising billboards to be able to promote local and be able to divide it up to where if a business can't afford the cost of a monthly advertising, that the Chamber of Commerce can break it up and make it to where it can be in affordable prices to try to benefit the community and get the businesses here locally that couldn't afford a full-size advertising to have parts of it. So while we can't regulate the content, there's things that are in here, especially under the 4C, that we can work with them to try and make sure it benefits the city in addition to.
You realize how short 8 seconds is on a car going down the highway 70 miles an hour?
7 to 10 seconds is the standard billboard rotation. I mean, so that's the KDOT standard. If you drive down and see any of the other billboards, that's the rotational time. It's the fact that it repeats that is where you pick that up.
So he's gonna give us 8 seconds out of 60. So that means there's 52 seconds of whatever he or whoever owns it
Whoever
gets
buys
to,
it.
yeah,
Yes.
gets to advertise whatever they want.
That would be 7 additional spots.
Yeah.
And Chamber would have the first right of refusal on those if they can buy them and fill them up.
So you're putting the responsibility of the content on the chamber's shoulders.
As far as to try and make it affordable for local, yes, and the Chamber and Sarah are fully on board with that.
But that's local content, not other
Right.
things, okay.
Did Travis give you any idea what the cost was gonna be?
As far as total cost,
No, as far as advertising?
vaguely, I don't have the numbers on that right off.
I think the last time he was here, it was like $1,000.
I think it was like 900.
Was it 900?
I think it was like $900 per week
Yeah.
for.
And the discussion was,
I think that's higher than what I remember, but I don't remember the numbers right off.
It's still very expensive.
we have very few businesses in this town that could afford $900 a week. Wanda's couldn't, Dale's Service couldn't.
I don't know any that could or would want to because they may have the money, but Ing Air has the money, but they're not going to advertise.
Maybe
Why?
help one.
Could your business advertise,
No.
Todd? The other thing that I have, we're looking at making a monument sign with the Soto underneath of it.
That is a potential. It's not anything that is at a point of, it's a point of discussion with council as far as a possibility.
would that have to come before the
Yeah.
planning?
Yeah, it sure would.
My thing is, I don't think I would want to see a monument sign that says DeSoto on it, and then an advertisement sign on top of that.
Advertising, who knows what.
Exactly.
I'd love to see a monument sign of some type freestanding for the city of DeSoto, something like Eudora has or something like that. But I don't like the idea of putting a sign above the city of DeSoto. And another thing that I have is what she brought up about highway distraction. The fire department runs a lot of calls on 10 Highway. Is this going to add to the distraction that goes on out there on the highway at 75 miles an hour?
I don't have any statistics on that, but these signs are prevalent throughout the KC metro area. There's a lot of them on 435, there's a lot on I-70, and with the Kansas Department of Transportation regulations on brightness, on the fact that there can't be moving video on them, they have to be static rotational signs. That typically has been addressed safety-wise.
It's not so much the brightness, it's the distraction that causes drivers. Amongst trying to read a billboard at 75 miles an hour and text and talk on the phone. You have to
The text and talk on the phone, yeah, you've got challenges there, but that's not something we can regulate.
Right.
The billboard signs, I mean, they've been around for years, decades.
They've been around for years, but this will be the only sign like it on the K-10 corridor.
Mm-hmm.
You think that you'd want to, you or just residents of the city would want to come home every night and see this big sign?
What I know is we have 40,000 plus cars driving K10, and they know us as the McDonald's exit. They don't know DeSoto Days is going on. They don't know
Right.
Riverfest is going on. They don't know. When I attended the parks meetings, public parks meetings, one of the comments, actually two comments in two different meetings, separate meetings, was Eudora has all this stuff going on. We have more. Why don't people know about it?
And why does people know what Eudora is doing?
I don't know. But we've got a chance to get exposure for our school district, to get exposure for us in this as well, where people driving down the highway have the capability of knowing there's stuff going on and we're not just the McDonald's exit. And
But you brought up a point, they don't have it in Eudora, but they know what's going on in Eudora.
Mm-hmm.
They don't have it in Lawrence, they know what's going on in Lawrence, so it's an avenue, is it one we
Mm-hmm.
wanna go down? I understand, I just,
So question, Mike, if we call this, next step calls it to a public hearing, correct? Is what you
Yeah.
said we would be calling it.
Yep.
So what does that open up as far as the next step after that?
Well, so the process of amending the regulations involves this public hearing, and it's, the notification is just on the website in general. If anybody has any comments on it, they come, just like we did on the zonings. Then planning commission would make a recommendation after the public hearing, take the input, then you make a recommendation to the council, who can adopt or reject it by ordinance. So the only way to amend the language and allow for the possibility is to call that public hearing, proceed like that. And the council did request that we consider this and do this process. I think it'd be appropriate to go ahead and move forward with that process, even though, even if everybody unanimously votes in the end of that to not revise the text, then we can run that up to the council.
so we just basically need to approve these changes.
No,
If
not
we're going to
necessarily. If everybody's
discuss.
comfortable enough with where we are,
Yeah.
if this was to go through, then we're comfortable enough with the parameters we've set. Then we can call the public hearing, and this will be the text that we discuss during that meeting.
That's what I meant.
Yeah. So I really don't need, you don't need to formally approve calling the public hearing or anything, but if we're comfortable enough with that, then we'll proceed in that way.
Well, my next question is, what if the owner of the sign decides someday to sell it? Saying a couple of years it's not paying for itself, so he wants to sell it to somebody.
Yeah, so that would be a particular it could be a particular condition of a use permit about transfer of ownership. We talk about that a lot with quarries and the sand pit. You know, if anybody, if conditions change, so we might have a process where we don't allow the ownership to change. But like with the sand pit permit, we do allow it, but the new owner has to affirm that they know and will adhere to the same terms and conditions that are in the permit. But
Is
that
that
would be
something
just
we need to have in here?
some language that indicates that we're going to restrict the change in ownership, or
Right.
I don't think we don't have it. We can restrict that on a case-by-case basis if we wish. That's just part of having a special use permit. So I don't think we need to specifically tie ourselves that we are going to do that or we're not going to do that in the language. Because once it's in the language, then you kind of have to do it.
So let's say we'll just use a number like, say there's 10 lots down there along the highway. Could each one of those lots put one of these pole signs up?
No, there's that buffer restriction,
If you-
4,000
4,000
feet
feet between.
between.
spacing.
Doesn't that kind of,
Yeah, I mean, the first guy in, he's lucky.
Gets it and that's it.
Yeah.
see, that's kind of, what they're doing is you're forcing the other people to go online with them.
Well, a little bit. So that, I think we talked about this that restriction cuts both ways. It does help the first guy in to
Right.
eliminate the competition, but it also kind of protects the city against the proliferation of these.
Yeah, but can't they put up a sign across the highway from it?
Yeah, so the way this reads is that you can't be within 4,000 feet of one on the same side of the highway. So you could put one right on the south
So
side.
you could have two directly across one another,
On one side. and two
or
on the other.
staggered a little bit.
Yeah,
And
I think we
have
looked at
one-
kind of the entire DeSoto, all the K10 all the way through DeSoto, and decided there could be as many as 4 if those buffers kind of hold true. Because Kill Creek exits more than 4,000 feet from the Commerce or the Lexington exit.
Are you through, Bob?
Yeah, go ahead.
On the special use permit, what kind of a time frame is normal for that permit to be good?
So that's an interesting question because I don't know what's normal on an electronic message board sign, but generally the applicant's going to want to be able to recoup his investment on the initial startup. You get into it a lot with quarries. If it costs them $3 million to develop a quarry, they're going to want to operate that and for a period of time so they can recoup that initial, at least so they can recoup that initial investment. What's typical quarries might be 10 years, might be 20 years. I've seen some as short as 5 years, but that was after a quarry was in operation. It's hard to equate a quarry to this.
My question for asking is, if this went through and a permit was issued, would we possibly want to have it on a short time frame, at least for the first one, in case this turns into be a major faux pas and we
Yeah.
want it to stop?
Yeah. Yeah, we could. We could. Again, the applicant's going to want to make sure that that's long
Yeah,
enough to
$1 million
return
investment.
his investment on
Not my
what
problem.
that is.
But
I'm concerned
Not
with
our
the city.
problem.
I understand.
The other thing we've done before is have a trigger, a review process trigger.
Yeah.
Like at some point, in the year 2 or 3, we're going to review the use and we'll address. But really, the best you can do is have language that both parties will operate in good faith to address whatever problems might arise. You can't really, within the review process, unless you say we can pull your SUP at the end of 2 years. In which case, the guy's investors are going to say, you got a 2-year permit. You don't have any 10-year permit. If my sign has to come down. It's tricky. That's a tricky conversation to have.
Yeah, but you don't want it for so long that a sign's going to be up that's doing the city harm.
Right,
So
right.
I could see 3-year for the first one.
Yeah.
And then from then on, say, 5 or 10
I
years.
guess the other side of that coin is, and special use permits are different because they're particular uses that have particular impacts. We can make case-by-case decisions. But we grant perpetual use permits
I know.
all the time. Anytime you rezone something or approve a site plan, that's forever.
Yeah.
You know, and that Jake's Fireworks building could be an eyesore in 2 years, and it could be just the bane of our existence, and there's not a lot to be done about that. So that's kind of the other side of that whole time limit coin.
What do we do after, I mean, say this isn't profitable for the person that puts it up? They don't get that many investors in it. And I realize, obviously, they're gonna do their research before they invest that kind of money, but at the end of the time, maybe just say that they find out it's not gonna work, and they don't have any investors anymore. So do they turn it over to the city so that we don't have a blank screen sitting up there, or what would happen then?
No,
What
I
happens?
don't think I can answer that. I mean, I guess the sign would be collateral, and I would imagine the investors would want to try to sell that asset to get their money back.
Because I've seen billboards, the old-fashioned ones, you know, that are just sitting
Oh,
there.
yeah,
and
they're awful.
Stuff's all
Yeah.
falling off of them. It
Yeah.
doesn't look nice, and
Well, definitely, we have regulations that provide for the maintenance of sign in general, and this would kind of fall into that. So, to the fact that the sign is off, I don't think would be considered a dilapidated state where we could go and make them turn it on and
Sure.
display something. But
Sure.
that's a good question. I mean, usually signs aren't $1 million investments like this one might be.
right.
So that's a good question. If the money just doesn't work out and the thing just goes belly up, then what? I don't have an answer.
Rob, is Mr. Hicks gonna be the sole financer of this, or is the city buying into this?
The electronic part of it would be solely.
And the other half?
High properties.
Okay.
Yeah, under what we're discussing now, and again, it's just a concept, but the city would pay for just kind of the city logo part. So the idea is that we'd come up with a cost estimate just for the electronic message board advertising sign, and then another cost estimate if you wanted to add some city component, and the city would only pay the incremental difference on that. So we're not, and if we decide that we don't want our logo on a sign like this, we'd rather do it someplace else, then this just stands on its own, and the city's not involved monetarily,
Right. Do you have anything else, Ian? Do you have any more questions? Todd? Tim?
No.
So do we, should we wait till the next meeting and have everybody here and review this one more time and then call a public hearing? What do you think
Well,
would be the
that's-
best?
That's at your discretion. I think it's. I don't know if that'd get us a whole lot further than we are right now.
I'd like to have a public hearing.
So do
And-
we
and
need
of
a,
course, at the public hearing, if we hear input or have some other ideas and we need to revise this, we could still call the public hearing and discuss that, and then still table it for a final decision to the
Okay.
next meeting.
well, do we need a vote to have a public hearing?
No, you don't. No,
Okay.
you don't. If everybody's comfortable enough with it, we'll just advertise for the public hearing and have it on the agenda for November.
Nobody else, any more questions for Rob or Mike?
Nope.
Well, let's schedule the public hearing and then,
Yep, very good.
okay.
Thank you. Good discussion.
Okay, the next one. Discuss the, under new business, the preliminary plat for Arcadia Estates. Is that yours, Brad?
Yeah, there's really a whole lot to talk about tonight, but as part of our process for preliminary plats, we do have a public notification requirement. And the developer for this actually turned in their preliminary plat actually in July, and we've gone back and forth with several rounds of comments. Then they finally submitted one which we felt was somewhat reasonable, and felt that we've been kind of putting off this public notification. And so we decided to go ahead and send out the letters to residents and nearby residents, put up a sign, and do all those things. And I also want to encourage you all to sign in, so if we continue next time, we can notify you either via email or, phone call or whatever, just so you know that, we're recommending, staff is recommending at this time that we table this item till we have a chance to fully review the development plan before us with preliminary plat. They did finally get us and we've gone through several iterations, and they did the morning of when packets are to be distributed, they did finally turn in another updated preliminary plat, and we just felt we didn't have time to go through all the items that we would normally present to the planning commission, so we're recommending that you table this until the next meeting. Just a couple things that they didn't cover. They turned in a drainage study, and Mike's evaluating that, hasn't had a chance to fully review the.
Wait, there's a revision?
No, it's still, but you haven't. I mean,
Oh, yeah,
they've
no,
got.
we've kicked that back to them.
Okay.
They got work to do on that drainage study.
Okay, all right. The right-of-way along Waverly, we talked with them about a pedestrian trail, that's not shown up. And then some things that necessarily aren't technically part of our code, but I think are good design. Their street system, it doesn't have any kind of curvilinear S-curves or anything like that. It's just a straight shot from one cul-de-sac to the other. I'd like to see some little, like I said, a slight S-curve just to give it a little bit more aesthetic feature. They don't have any kind of, they do have some entry monuments, which they did add, but for instance, at Timber Trails and some of the other subdivisions, there's like a little island or something that might add some feature I think would be kind of nice. They talk about having a fairly extensive or high-end subdivision, and some of those are things that you'll see around other communities that they'll have, and I'd kind of like to be able to encourage them a little bit to do a little bit better with some of their aesthetic treatments. So anyway, all those things are kind of in play, but we wanted to get at least introduce the topic to the Planning Commission and let the folks that were notified that are here at the Planning Commission tonight to sign in, let them know that we will be continuing this discussion at the next meeting, and maybe take some preliminary comments back to the developer from the Planning Commission. I'll stand for any questions you may have or comments.
Anyone have any questions for Brad on this?
Sounds like they still have to do a whole lot of work.
Yeah, well, yeah.
I like the fact that you're encouraging them too, Brad, to put some extra aesthetics in there to make it a nicer community.
Yeah, I think in general terms, these are estate-sized lots. They're 1 acre. They've got them as close to 1 acre as they could, which is our minimum for on-site septic systems, which is going to have to be done out there. They'll be on Rural Water District 7's water, so it won't be city water, but they'll be required to extend water infrastructure as well as gas and electrical throughout the subdivision. Streets will be regular 28-foot wide with curb and gutter and sidewalks. And so, interior too. And we've had, like Brad said, discussions about some sort of a pedestrian, just some allowance for some future pedestrian improvement along Waverly. So, yeah, we have had quite a bit of back and forth on this one. We annexed it, we zoned it several months ago. This is the appropriate place. It's a good spot for large lot estate-sized residential development. We don't have a problem with the use or the location. It's just some of the particulars we do. We're glad to see that that both accesses are taken off of Waverly and there's not an access off of 95th Street. We're glad to see that 98th Street lines up with the existing 98th Street, so that's good. The northern access street there is far enough away from 95th not to cause any problems there. In general, the use is okay, the placement's okay. It's just, some of the particulars need some work.
And they're able to handle stormwater runoff?
Well, we'll see. That was part I'm not entirely comfortable. They initially submitted the drainage report. Calculations showed that the runoff after development was not going to be any more than the runoff prior to development. but there were some problems with those calculations. So now they're proposing stormwater detention at the northeast corner of the site, and you can see it on this layout here that you have. It shows this DE detention easement across the backs of lots 1, 2, and 3. I don't know if that's, I haven't seen any revisions in the drainage calculations to give me any indication on the sizing for that detention facility. So that's a little bit, I'm a little bit uncomfortable with that right now. That might need more area. They may lose a lot. They may have to reconfigure some of these lots to get the building envelopes where they need them. So that's one thing that's one reason we don't want to take action on this tonight, because it might impact the layout.
If it's any help, that corner when the county had it.
We've had
always
trouble
a
with it
major
forever.
problem.
I know. That's why I'm sensitive to that. Yeah, we've had trouble with it.
The question I've got is, if these people have taken this much time to get to this level and they have so much further to go, do we honestly believe they'll be ready by next month? I'd hate to set everything up and then them not come through.
Well, we'll see. I mean, all we can do is table it again next month. That's no.
Why don't we table it until they provide every piece of information that you want and then look at it?
Well, I guess that. So we did that one month.
Yeah, we've
Kind of had it on the agenda, and we told them we weren't going to bring it to us. The only reason we're looking at it tonight is because we advertised. We had signs out. We didn't know when we put the signs out that we wouldn't have the information till Friday afternoon. That's really the only reason we're talking about it tonight, frankly. So that is that's our standard practice. It doesn't come here unless we've got it all and we've had a chance to look at it, so that we can tell you guys whether it's
So obviously they dropped the ball and let you guys schedule the public hearing part of it, or the people come in and then didn't follow through for you.
Yeah,
Imagine that.
I don't think they did it maliciously.
Oh,
think
no,
maybe
no,
they
I'm
just
sure they
got
didn't.
busy.
But we've had that happen before.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks, guys.
Any other questions for Mike or Brad? Oh, we'll check this out then next month.
Yeah, so there's notification requirements, and we have, people here tonight that got the notification. It's not a public hearing item, but, maybe when we have the applicant here, there might be some time for some questions and dialogue from those in attendance.
Okay.
Probably be appropriate.
Bob, I just might add, before you get to the calendar, that next meeting could be a pretty full agenda. It's on the 27th. It's after the Thanksgiving holiday, so I'd like to make sure you all do your best to get here. We could have site
Don't
plan.
eat too much turkey.
Yeah, there could be a pretty
I
heavy,
won't
heavy
be
meeting,
here
so,
November.
Tim won't
27th.
be here in November.
okay.
Planned vacation.
So anyway, I just want to mention that.
Okay, thank you. Anybody else have any more questions for staff? Okay,
Motion to table?
Yeah, yeah.
you want to table this from,
Could we?
yeah,
Yeah, if you have a motion to table till the November meeting.
do we entertain a motion to table this?
Motion to table this until next month.
I'll second that.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Very good.
Okay. November 1st is our city council meeting, and the 15th is the city council meeting at 7. And we'll be back here November 27th. And if you can't make it, please call Alana so that we can make other arrangements.
Mike, when would be a time, sounds like November's gonna be pretty busy, but I would like to, have our property maintenance code ordinances reviewed in the future, so we can take a look at those and see if everybody's still happy with those, or if maybe we need to make some revisions to those.
Property maintenance code? Yeah, that's a part of the building code package. Actually, I think we are due for a building code update. At the city council level, update the new family of international building codes.
Okay,
And I can't swear when Steve was wanting to have that, but it's coming up. I think he wants to have it before the first of the year, by the shortly after the first of the year.
Okay.
That'd be a good time to look at it, because the property maintenance code's contained in that.
Okay,
So that's probably a good time. I'll make a note to ask Steve and let you know when he's planning on doing that.
good.
I think he's working through, there's always some little tweaks that we want to do to those building
Sure.
codes, so he's working through some of that.
Mhm.
He wants to make sure we don't adopt something that's just totally out of line
Sure.
with what we're doing. So let me ask what his schedule is on that. I'll get back to you.
Great,
It could be a good time to look at that.
perfect.
Okay. Motion to adjourn.
Motion.
A second.
All in favor, say aye. Meeting adjourned.
Give me a second, I'll get the video stopped. Before,